Hello, this is part two in a series of videos on the evidence for astrology. This is obviously a big topic, a controversial topic. Is there evidence that astrology works? Are there what we call measurable effects? Are there tangible effects from astrology? And the answer is yes. And this is part two in the series that describes some of the very solid evidence that astrology actually has real effects. So our subtitle here is Exciting Discoveries that Establish Astrology as a Fully Academic Evidence-Based Field of Study. So what I'm presenting here is that there is a form of astrology that we call vibrational astrology that is an evidence-based field of astrology. An evidence-based field is not synonymous with science. Science, in the context that we're using it here, would refer to things like chemistry, physics, areas of biology, which have extremely high confidence, clear rules, theories, able to predict things very clearly. Then there are evidence-based practices like psychology and even medicine. Medicine is based on the science of biology. But very rarely does medicine have the confidence for knowing what to do when someone has a cold or pneumonia or whatever it is, to know exactly what to do and the variables involved. It's so complicated that we call it an evidence-based practice. Evidence-based practice started to be developed in the 1970s and then really started to blossom in the 1980s. So evidence-based practice is a relatively new concept and a new development, and vibrational astrology is part of these new academic disciplines that we call evidence-based. So in the first video in this series, we learned about the research from the 1970s to the 1990s. This was a preliminary research that set a foundation for the later research. Most of that research in the 1970s and 1980s and into the 1990s that I described in the first video in this series was about interviewing people and also software development. You know, before you can go hiking up a mountain, you have to get ready. You have to get your backpack, your food supplies, your water. You don't just start walking up the mountain. If it's a high mountain and you're going to be, gone for a long time, you've got to prepare. And so before we can do good, solid, modern research, we have to develop the tools. We have to develop the resources. We have to develop the infrastructure. So a lot of what I'm sharing in these videos is about the reality of doing research. Not that you can just jump in as if you live in some idealistic fairyland and there's data and there's software that falls out of heaven. There's a lot involved to develop what I just referred to as the infrastructure, the foundations. So the software development, thousands and thousands of hours. We had teams of people developing the calculation features, the ability to see things in the charts, and then adding the databases, huge amounts of work, learning all kinds of different computer languages, database management, all of these things developed through tireless effort. So I'm sharing with you the reality, because when someone comes in, for example, a scientist or anyone, even astrologers, sometimes they say, well, why haven't you done the research? Well, it's not that trivial. We have done the research, and I'm giving you a realistic picture of what's involved in creating the research. So all of the huge amount of software development, and then the integrating modern research methods. And in the 70s and particularly in the 80s and 90s, I also did a lot of studying of scientific concepts, mathematical modeling, and so on. And so during these years of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, I made friends with the data. This is a term that's used in machine learning, where you explore what the distribution of the data is. And I'm generalizing that phrase into a different context of just saying I got familiar with the data, the information that we use in astrology and the astrological theory, and I experienced astrology as an astrologer, and I critically assessed what appeared to work and what did not work. So as I mentioned in the previous video, I wrote notes before I consulted someone. I analyzed the charts, the astrology charts, for about 2 hours. I made extensive notes. Then after the consultation, I went back to the notes, put check marks next to the ones that worked, X's next to the ones that I could not confirm. So I came up with ideas of what I expected the person to be like. I added additional notes of things that might work, or modified the ideas, and gradually the theories got better and better, and I was better able to anticipate what the person would be like. This is just a personal exploration to get fully engaged in astrology. That is actually a very important part of research, because if you jump into the research just as a data analyst and you don't have a feeling for what it is you're studying, you don't have it in your blood what this astrology is, you're just looking at it as an outsider, you don't have that intuitive, direct connection with the information. So this was a long preparatory stage to develop an understanding of what astrology is, and it was an essential stage. So research is not just about manipulating numbers and getting statistical significance. There is a lot involved. This is the reality of what research really is. So I'm giving you a realistic assessment of what's actually really going on in research. To become a content expert, dive deep into it, develop the infrastructure, the software, the databases, an understanding of modern research methods, going back to college, getting an MA degree in research evaluation and methodology to perfect this approach, and learning all the different software tools, the R statistical software package, for example, and other tools in addition to this software that we developed with what we call lower level language. So all of this is part of the research. It's not just the final end result. So what I'm doing in these videos, I'm giving you a realistic assessment of what this research actually is. Now, starting around the 1990s, we start developing data visualization tools. This means software to see how the data is distributed. This is a very big deal in modern research methods. Modern research methods is not just about getting statistical significance. It's about knowledge discovery. It's about extracting information from the databases, the ability to visualize what's going on with the data. All of this meant we have to develop the databases, we have to develop the software tools, and programming data visualization, very time consuming and tedious. We did all of that over decades. And so that's what was going on in the 1990s. So you see that this is a long road to develop all of this stuff that's needed. Too often people think research is just, collect the data, test a hypothesis. There's much, 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 much more to do real research. And this is what we're doing, trying to learn how astrology works by going into the data. Okay, so now let's get into more of the details of this next stage of the research, which is the data visualization and the analysis of the databases, to see what's going on and to see if we can confirm some of the things that appeared. I say appeared because it's not a carefully controlled research. In interviewing people, it was systematic, it was critical, there were notes, there was careful consideration of other ways that this information might appear to be true, how gullible people are willing to agree with things, etc. So it was critically done, but still it's not as formal and as rigorous as the data you can get from a database. So now we're stepping up the level. Now that we've developed the software tool and the databases to go in and get this data visualization and this information and analysis of the data. So one of the things that really helped us is that Mikkel and Francoise Galkelin collected birth data of thousands of eminent people, such as athletes, musicians, painters, scientists, politicians, and other professions. They already collected the data with birth certificates. We call that AA data from a birth record. We have the data. We imported that data into our Kepler and our Sirius software, so we have data. And we can do what we call in modern research methods a classification analysis. Can we look at the charts and see what charts classify a person as an athlete as opposed to a musician? And the Galcoins came up with some ideas on how these different professions can be distinguished from each other based on the birth chart. But we tremendously improved the model over what the Galcoins did. So we took their data and we made a much more solid model that got confirmed with new evidence. So when we go into a database, there's a few things you can do. One is you can do like an artificial neural network, an ANN. This is like, you might call it black box research, where you have no assumptions. Just let the computer analyze the data and come up with a model of what's going on. Just goes in without very many assumptions, almost no assumptions, and figures it out. Another possibility, what I have here just below this bold line, we can test our theory. So we might have a theory that athletes have Mars, aspecting Uranus or something. We can test the theory. But what my research primarily was, it was neither black box research, like you get for an artificial neural network, where you give no assumptions, nor was it testing specific theories. It was something in between. And I have it in bold blue at the bottom here. We can do theory-based exploratory research to build a model. In other words, I have some ideas of what's in the charts of athletes. I have some ideas of what's in the charts of musicians. From those 30 years of working with people, interviewing them, doing all that analysis, taking classes, going to lectures, reading books, communicating, connecting with other astrologers, developing some ideas of what appears to be in their charts. I'm going to use those ideas, but I'm not going to use them as a strict theory. I'm going to say, gee, I have a hunch that this is probably in the charts of musicians. I have a hunch that this is in the charts of musicians, and something else for painters. And then we see if something like that is in the charts. It makes sense, doesn't it? Common sense. Use your theory, but not so strictly. Not like I'm going to test a theory. I just have some guesses, and I'm going to be particularly sensitive to looking for those kind of things, but also be open-minded for other things. So this is exploratory research. We're exploring the data, but we also have some theories that we expect to see in the data. So it's not pure black box exploratory research. It's exploratory research with some guesses. This is what most of my research was in the 1990s, 2000, and into the 2010s. This is what we're doing, and even today in the 2020s. Okay, so there's many different kinds of research, and we're doing a kind of research that's called knowledge discovery, KD, sometimes called KDD, knowledge discovery in databases. And this is how we're approaching it. So we put the data of the professional groups into the Kepler and Sirius software, and we hired someone to enter birth data from magazines and journals. So we had the Galcoin data that we just imported from a source, an online source, and we got permission to do that and so on. And we also have astrological journals and magazines. We had thousands of them. And we hired someone to type all that data in, and we built this database of lots of different kinds of charts. And then again, I got the MA degree from University of Florida in Research and Evaluation Methodology in 2018. I actually took all the courses for a PhD, but we couldn't work out a dissertation for me to write that would incorporate astrology, so I just settled on just getting the master's degree. Excuse me. All of this is important for properly developing these research methods. Now, here is a concrete example of what I mean by having a basic idea of what might be in the chart. This is not an idea that I had, but it's a common idea in astrology. Suppose we want to look at the charts of astrologers. What do you think would be in their charts? Some people would say some kind of Mercury-Uranus aspect. So that's the expectation, the general idea Mercury-Uranus. But instead of defining what the aspects are and the orbs, what we do instead is we do data visualization, which is very simple in this case. We simply graph the angular distance between Mercury and Uranus from 0 to 180 degrees. And there is the graph of what we get. This is the actual graph of the distance between Mercury and Uranus for astrologers. I don't remember how many astrologers it is. I don't remember if we selected only AA data. So in the Sirius software, you can say I want only AA data, or A, which means from a biography or something, or better, or you can go to B, and so on. So you can pick your level, and you get lots and lots, like hundreds or possibly thousands of astrologers. And here we have 18 sectors, means every 10 degrees. So from 0 to 10 degrees, that's this beginning on the left, it's very low. So what this tells us is that astrologers tend to not have Mercury conjunct Uranus. You follow me? This is very simple. This graph starts very low. And then at 20 to 30 degrees, it goes up. 30 to 40, it's high. 40 to 50, it's very high. Sextile. This might be surprising, but 50 to 60 degrees, even 60 to 70, quite low. This means astrologers tend to not have Mercury and Uranus sextile, and they tend to not have Mercury and Uranus trine. Now, you may be familiar that we need to have a control group, so we would compare this to a control group. But I'm taking you through this one step at a time to show you how we do data visualization instead of jumping in and saying, oh, I think astrologers have this aspect between Mercury and Uranus. You can just guess from here till kingdom come. Why not see what we call the distribution? So this is a lot of what we do. We look at distributions to see what stands out. We see the quincunx is very high. And then we think, does that make any sense? 150 degrees. So we can look at different possibilities in the data. This is knowledge discovery based on our content expertise, based on the ideas that we think might work. We explore Mercury Uranus because we think that might be related to astrologers. Actually, I don't think astrologers would have Mercury Uranus aspects, but many astrologers would. So you can look at whatever pairs of planets. You got it? It's very simple. How do we do the research? We don't go in with some specific theory because it's not likely to work. We explore the data to see what's going on. And then the next step is in the Sirius software, you can create a control group and you can see how much this deviates from the control group. Just giving you an idea of how we make these discoveries, how we move astrology forward as an evidence-based practice. By basing it on actual databases with the actual distributions, we have solid data and there's no selection bias. I'm not picking the charts. So it elevates astrology from being just a personal experience to being more of a data-driven, evidence-based investigation. And since the years around 1990s to 2000, by the time we get to the year 2020, between 2015 and 2022, in the last 5 to 10 years, we've made breakthroughs. Huge, incredible breakthroughs. And now we have models that we can replicate with new data. It's gotten very solid. But what I'm sharing with you is the long, gradual, we call it incremental steps, little by little, building the software tools, building the data visualization tools, building the databases, exploring the data. This is how we made the breakthrough discoveries. This is the reality of how it's done. This is the reality of why this hasn't been done before. Because if you just jump in with your preconceived idea, it tends not to work. And this is how we discovered all these new variables that really, really work and that I started to discover through those interviews. So, when people ask, is there any evidence astrology really works? The answer is yes, and it's not so simple as just somebody knowing from some ancient formula that boom, it worked. No, it took a lot of innovation, a lot of hard work, a lot of building an infrastructure to gradually develop this data-driven, evidence-based discipline. So here I'm showing what I mentioned before is that astrologers tend to not have Mercury sextile Uranus. There's 50 to 60 degrees at a low. 110 to 120 degrees is at very low. Also, this opposition area, very low. So even 120 to 130, relatively low. So it's data visualization to see what's going on, to develop ideas. Now we know we don't have to bother doing a formal test of whether Mercury is sextile or trine Uranus. We know it's not. In fact, we know it's less than random possibility. And when we compare it to a control group, that would make it even clearer. So here's where we get to the control group. So this is a graph that's produced by the Sirius software, where we can go into the software, we tell it to make a control group. It's called a shuffled control group. It takes the date, time, and place of the person and shuffles them all together. So suppose one person's born on January 1st in Rome, Italy, and another person's born on July 7th in Chicago, Illinois. So it takes July from one person, takes the first from another person, takes Chicago, or a third person's born in San Francisco, mixes them all together. It's a very, what we call, conservative control group, an excellent control group. It's a better control group than grabbing people, real people, because it's got the same distribution of years and dates and times. It's what we call very conservative, which means that if the astrologers have something different from this shuffled control group, it really is different. Now, will that difference appear with new data? We don't know. But what we do know is that it's definitely there with this data we're analyzing. We call it the training data. So we analyze data to see what's there. We have an excellent control group, beautiful, wonderful control group. We just make it right there in the software, and then we tell it to compare the control group of astrologers to the actual astrologers. Now, I'm not taking you through the software features because this video is about what the research is, how it was done, and what was found. I have other videos that show you the details, and you can learn how to do that research and create those control groups. What we want to learn here is there evidence that astrology really works? Yes. And this is one of the things that helped us discover it. And what I've done here is I've put in a rectangle, some of the outstanding things we see outstanding things we see just in this example with Mercury, Uranus, and astrologers, is that when we compare the astrologers to the control group, here it is from, 55 degrees to 66 degrees. Here's the sextile right here, right around the area of the sextile. Almost everything is low. The bars are going down. This tells us that the astrologers, compared to the control group, have Mercury sextile Uranus less often than random. Well, might be surprising. If you think Mercury Uranus would be something that would be in the charts of astrologers, it is not. In fact, it's just the reverse. The astrologers tend to not have Mercury and Uranus in soft aspect, which is a sextile. Here's the trine. Also, most of the lines going down, one of them going up a little bit, but overall going down. I put in darker pink, a smaller orb, which is more consistently down, and then I put a lighter pink outside that for a larger orb. The point is that in this database, astrologers have Mercury sextile and trine Uranus less often than random. That's a fact. Now, whether that would be true with new data or not, we don't know. But what we can guess with some confidence is even if it was just randomly below average in this particular database, it's extremely unlikely, like one in a many millions, that astrologers would have this more often than not, because it's low. They don't. It's almost guaranteed. So we can answer questions very quickly, very easily. Just create the control group, create the data visualization, and we know that we don't know anything in science. We call it confidence. We have extremely high confidence that astrologers do not have Mercury and Uranus in the soft aspects of sextile and trine. This elevates astrology to a whole new level. You can go to social media, Facebook or whatever, and people say, oh, what's in the charts of astrologers? Oh, I bet they have Mercury and Uranus. We've already shown that that is not true. So astrology, as we currently practice it and understand it, is obsolete. It's been replaced with data-driven, evidence-based tools to give us answers. It's made obsolete in the sense that that's not the only thing we rely on. We have this very powerful, important additional information that we can supplement our personal experience with. Personal experience is still very important, but not by itself isolated from the database information. It's the combination of the database analysis with personal experience. And by the way, does any of this involve statistics? Numbers? No. The computer does all the numbers. It's data visualization. What's needed to advance in this research is good astrology, the ability to look at these graphs and find patterns that make sense according to astrological theory. So we've learned something, and this is the important development in the last several decades, and particularly in the last 5 to 10 years, where we have not only shown what does not work, as we have here, but we have shown what does work. What does work, very solid, very replicable evidence of what is in the charts of certain people. It's exciting. It's a whole new revolution that we have this. We still just call it evidence-based rather than science, because it doesn't have the kind of confidence that you have when you send rockets to outer space or something. But it has very high confidence, comparable to what you get in psychology and many kinds of studies in medicine. Very solid support that agrees with what happens when we meet with clients and proves to be useful in client work. Okay, so by doing this kind of exploratory research to see if ideas in modern Western astrology or Vedic astrology, cosmobiology, harmonic astrology, and what we now call vibrational astrology, which is a specific system that incorporates ideas from many other systems, we find a simple and consistent set of astrological indicators of a particular behavior. This is the breakthrough. This is the breakthrough made in modern days with this very flexible, powerful software and the database. We have simple and consistent set of astrological indicators of a particular behavior. And we have confirmed some of the findings with new data. That's the big thing. What we're doing now is what we call training data. You're just taking data that we have. Then we take new data and we see if the formula works. Some of the things that we have come up with, we have replicated with new data. That's the breakthrough. That's the huge thing. And let me mention, a lot of the research being done in astrology by other astrologers outside of our vibrational astrology community, some of them are not distinguishing very clearly between training data and test data. And that's terrible, because they're using training data and say they discovered something. Well, you never discover anything with training data. The real discovery comes when you test it with new data. You must do the training data. It's an important research, and it's good to report the results, but don't exaggerate the confidence that you get from training data. I can take training data and get probabilities less than 1 in 5 million very easily. What you do is you just find a formula that works. That's not impressive, and some people are shouting from the rooftops, oh, we've shown astrology works because it's 1 in 5 million. No, that was training data. And look at our first rule, a simple and consistent set of astrological indicators. So if you say that what's in the charts of musicians is this combination of 20 different aspects and planets and signs, and there's no theoretical consistency, and you're using different orbs, and you can't explain exactly why you have these rules, the rules look rather arbitrary, there isn't close connection with theory, and there's no simple, elegant basis to it, that's a very bad formula. So it's not just the probability of getting the results. It needs to be simple and consistent. These are very fundamental rules of machine learning, very fundamental, that you'll see emphasized by experts. So there's a lot involved in doing research properly. Consistent, simple set of rules, and then ultimately being able to replicate it with new data. Whatever level you are at the research is fine. We've been working on this for half a century, 50 years. It's good to report step by step, but you just want to be honest. You just say, okay, I'm building a model. This model worked with this much data. It's a step in the right direction. It's better than just using random charts that you just pull out of whatever famous person or client that has a lot of what we call selection bias and selective perception. You just want to be honest about what you're reporting. What I'm saying is that now, in the year 2022, we have extremely high confidence that we have found measurable effects, tangible, real results from astrological variables. Now, what we found in our research in vibrational astrology, doing this 50 years of research, is this. I'll read from the slide. The astrological indicators found to be important are not used by most astrologers, so many astrologers are skeptical, sometimes more skeptical than non-astrologers. So what I'm telling you is in answer to this question that I posed at the beginning of this series of videos, is there evidence for astrology? I answered it right away. I said, yes, there is. But it's not the astrology you're familiar with. It's not about your rising sign or the rule of your rising sign in the 5th house. That may work. It may be very powerful. We just haven't confirmed it yet. What we have confirmed is a list of astrological variables that almost nobody uses. Okay? So the research, this knowledge discovery has opened a new door. The ideas are based on ideas that have been around for hundreds, sometimes thousands of years, depending on which idea. The ideas, the concepts are not completely new, but the way that they are used, the interpretations given, the details of what orbs are used and how the things work, it's all new. Taken some basic elements and constructed a whole new system of astrology we call vibrational astrology, and it works. And how did we do it? 50 years of incrementally improving, testing, critically assessing, looking, exploring, and gradually learning research methods, developing software. Over half a century, it's brought us to this crowning achievement, a whole new kind of astrology that is evidence-based, that's academic, that's ready for the universities, ready for professional application. It's done. It's not something in the future. Okay, so that's another critical part of answering this question. Are there tangible, real effects from astrology? Yes, and they are things that hardly any astrologers use. Now, we are at 34 minutes. First video was 20 minutes. This one's a little bit longer. I'm going to stop here. In part 3 of the research, I'm going to show you the research findings. These are the research findings. So the part 3 in this series, I'm going to show you what we found, and I'm going to go over some of the research studies. So we're going to get into the heart of the evidence. But these first two videos are important so that you appreciate how we got to this point and what built up to it. And all of that was necessary and essential for what I will show you in part 3 in this series of the evidence for astrology. Thank you very much for listening, my friends. I'll see you in part 3 of this series. Thank you. God bless. Namaste.